Hi, Michael Grayson S. here, creator of the Palace of 1001 Rooms. And I just want to make a reply video to Gary Snow, who's kind enough to make an analysis video of a recent Reddit thread where I had a rant, as he described, which is actually true. Was a little frustrated about the state of the current community and my concerns about whether I have a place in it or not. So Gary was really nice enough to take a caring, kind critique of everything, which I very much appreciate. In a snarky age of Reddit, it was nice to hear a kind voice. So I'm just going to take a minute to address a few of the things that he said. First of all, I completely agree with you, Gary. I think that everything you said about being evocative is true. I think that's true across the spectrum for a lot of different art forms. You really have to pull people in, and to some degree, that's sort of a superficial view about things, which is I think where I'm really trying to come in at. First of all, I just wanted to correct a couple of things that Gary had said, which was that it was a one-man band. It's actually not. I have a co-writer, Wes, which cute part of our story is we grew up playing D&D together. He's a little bit younger than me. He's actually one of my best friend's younger brothers, and that's how we first met. Me and the best friend played. Wes wanted to join the game. Eventually, he became one of the best players, most memorable characters from that campaign world, and went on to DM it after I stopped. But anyway, Wes is my co-writer. So it is not actually just one person. It is kind of solely my vision, but he does do a lot of the writing and helps out a whole lot. So just a little correction there. And then so back to the subject of being evocative with the art. So it's 1001 rooms, and there's something to be said for subtlety. I do have players, fans ask me sometimes, like, can you not show the monster? Because I want to surprise my players with it, which is completely understandable. And so, we don't always want it to just jump off the page at you. We like subtlety. If we made every room of the palace just suddenly, oh my God, look at this page, look what's going on here, I think that would get old after a while. I think that some of the beauty of it is that it is just an architecture. It definitely puts you in that room. You definitely get a real feel for your surroundings immediately with the way we're doing this for the 3D views and all. But yeah, I mean, I just don't want every image to just jump out and grab you like that. I like subtle. So anyway, back to what Gary was saying, he used a musical analogy to kind of make his point, which just immediately resonated with me because I think a lot of us will agree that D&D is, in some ways, it's like the new rock and roll now. It's like there's all these indie producers out there trying to break it big. So yeah, that was a great analogy, and I want to take that a little bit further. He mentioned U2 being one of his favorite bands. Me and him are contemporaries age-wise, so we're definitely both coming from the same place. With the exception that I didn't think U2 was that great of a band. Sorry, Gary. I think they were an important band. I really respect them. They weren't really my jam. Furthermore, really a whole lot of punk rock really wasn't my thing. And in getting to explain why punk rock wasn't really my thing is going to get to the core of what we're talking about here with art being evocative. So, okay, so let's just say, so my favorite band was Phish in the 90s, and to some degree is still one of my favorite bands. I keep up with them, not as much as I used to, but love that band. And they're a perfect kind of parallel to what the Palace of 1001 Rooms is. So, Phish was a band that didn't really fit the 90s, which again, this goes back to what Gary was saying. He's talking about the Palace is not quite something that's 5th edition. It doesn't quite hit the 5th edition audience, because that's not where they're at anymore, and I agree with that. And it doesn't really go back and fit into the OSR scene either, because it's not as grungy as that. So like Phish was a band that came out in the 90s when there was a little bit of a punk revival, and there was definitely, the grunge scene was being born at that time. And Phish didn't fit either of those. Phish was a ripoff of the Grateful Dead to some degree. People will say that. I don't agree with that, but a lot of people will say that, and it's easy to see where the comparison comes from. So in the musical analogy, I think of Gygax as being like the Grateful Dead. Grateful Dead were very much a band that was in the initial stages of rock and roll, not quite in the 50s, but definitely by the late 60s they were coming onto the scene. Some would say that's when rock and roll was at its greatest. Whatever. But that definitely, they started it to some degree. They at least embraced what rock and roll was, which was taking a lot of these Americana roots elements of music and putting it together into this thing. And Phish kind of just did the same thing 30 years later, and everybody's like, well, what's the big deal? Well, Phish was just an amazing band. There was a point in time when Trey Anastasio was arguably the best guitar player on the face of the planet, in rock and roll anyway. So do we think we're the best thing in the in the OSR scene, or whatever we want to call it? No, but what we do is deliver quality content. It's not groundbreaking, and not everything needs to be groundbreaking. Sometimes when people are breaking ground, going into new territory, that doesn't mean it's necessarily good. It may be something new, but I kind of like to think of some of my favorite music is bread and butter music. It's not anything that special, but it's really good, and you can dance to it, you can tap your feet to it, you can sing along to it. The Palace kind of hits those notes. We're not. Here's what we're doing that nobody else is doing. We're making something of a size and scale I don't think that's ever been done before. There's mega dungeons out there. They're mostly an overhead map of a dungeon. The Palace of 1001 Rooms is intimately getting to know every one of these chambers. So I do think that that's something original. But yeah, sometimes you can be all style and no substance. Just because you used MS Paint, spray paint splatter on your introduction page doesn't make you punk rock. Sometimes it's just some people are trying, and I think oftentimes a little too hard. But I don't want to critique other people's projects. All I'm saying is that I believe in the Palace. I believe that it is good quality content, and I think there are a lot of people out there that appreciate it. I think that's about all I have to say about that. Again, thanks, Gary. Fantastic review of that Reddit thread, that phenomenon that happened. I think we agree on a whole lot of things. And I really appreciate you taking the time to address my little project. For everyone else that may be watching, if you're not a fan of the Palace or not a backer, please become a backer of the Palace of 1001 Rooms. Oh, one more time, back to the musical analogy. There are plenty of bands out there that never really get big success, but they pay the bills playing gigs. They do it for 20, 30 years, and that's a living for them. You may have never heard of them, but they had, I'm sure they enjoyed their careers. So anyway, we love what we're doing. We're going to keep doing it. We hope a handful of you folks out there will appreciate it. Oh, before I go, one more thing, Gary. You said there were no monsters. You were actually showing a picture of the bell tower mimic from one of the pages of chapter 4 when you said that there were no monsters. That's a perfect example of the subtlety of this project. Is the bell tower mimic is right there. It's staring at you. If you really look at this image, you can see its eyes. Its mouth is right below the stairwell. I think that's beautiful. I love it. I think it's perfectly in the spirit of a mimic. Anyway, That's all I got.